All right, PacGold. So the Alice River Gold Project, I'll take you through that. There's a statement here, but I won't be doing any forward-looking statements. Everything I'm going to be going over is essentially a backward-looking statement. We're going to really focus on the sort of the history of how we've got where we've got right now. So unlocking an entire gold corridor. So the Alice River Gold Project, we're located in far north Queensland up here. We're at the top end of we're in the Kennedy Igneous Province, the Permo-Carb Kennedy Igneous Province, which extends right the way up the east coast of Australia here. This belt of gold mineralisation, there's a number of nice, profitable, large gold mines. A lot of these mines are Permo-Carboniferous in age, and that's certainly the age that we think that we're sitting in up here at Alice River. How we've achieved our success, for us, we see it as we've applied modern exploration techniques to an overlooked historical goldfield. The results that we've achieved from our first drill program, we've discovered what we call the F1A zone. And some of our latest results include 17 metres at 9.3, 3 at 25, including 3 at 25, and 26 at 3.6, including 3 at 21. These are all new results from this new high-grade target zone that I'll show you through in a moment. As mentioned, Permo-Carb gold mineralisation, we see ourselves sitting on a large regional scale shear, and it's on the margin between two large granitic plutons. And I'll show you a geology map in a moment. So just this figure on the left here, there's a 10-kilometre scale bar in the bottom left there. I think this is a snapshot of the 100,000 geology. You can see our tenement outline here, and the green is we've actually got 8 granted mining leases here. So the green outlines are our granted mining leases. Even though this map looks quite sort of detailed, this whole region is dominantly covered by shallow sand cover, and I'll show you some photographs of that in a moment. So as a regional scale geology, it's quite good, but when you get down into detail, there is a lot of sort of unknowns on this map that we're discovering. So as metal, limited exploration over the past 20 years, and that's where we see a lot of the opportunity that we've achieved recently has come from the ability to apply modern exploration techniques to this historical goldfield. A lot of the historical exploration was done in the 80s and 90s. Cyprus and Goldminco did a lot of excellent work back in those days, but we've been able to sort of leverage off that exploration work and take it to another level, sort of applying modern exploration models and modern exploration sort of techniques. So for PacGold, we secured the project 100% in December 2020. And that came with 8 granted mining leases and 5 granted EPMs. Just a bit of history. This image on the right here just shows a bit of an aerial snapshot. The historical open pit situated just in here. Now there's probably been about 30,000 ounces of gold come out of there at about 5.5 grams per tonne gold. A lot of that mining was done in the 80s and 90s. Back in the early 1900s, this was an historical gold field, and there was sort of a number of underground workings scattered over about 3 kilometres. So you can see we've also got an operating airstrip. Now this is still an airstrip, and we use that airstrip. It's got a weekly mail run comes in to service the local property. We're on Alice River Station here, so it's a cattle property. There's an established camp here, large freshwater dam, and there's an old mill here that was an old CIP plant. It's not the sort of plant that you'd restart, but it certainly is sort of an example of how they processed the previous ores here. A lot of the mining that was done here, the weathering isn't really that deep. The historical open pit went down around about 40 metres depth, but on surface, a lot of the quartz veins are actually sort of fresh on surface, and it's the alteration around that you sort of see a bit of weathering. But in general, the weathering's less than sort of 10 metres as a general rule of thumb on the project. So for us, when I first took a look at this data back in, it was over a year ago, you could see that there were descriptions that there was a number of prospects. And looking through the old data, you could see some nice grades. But for me, what I needed to demonstrate was that it wasn't just isolated, separate prospects. We needed to sort of demonstrate that it was part of a larger gold system. A lot of that thinking system-wise, I guess you call it a systems approach to exploration. A lot of that thinking came out of the 90s, the mid-90s, with some of the Amira projects. P425 was one of the classics, and I'm sure Greg Morrison's on this call. He was one of the guys that put a lot of that thinking together and thinking about systems rather than individual prospects. So that was the first thing I wanted to try and achieve here, was that we were looking at not individual prospects, but a connected ore system. So how were we going to achieve that? I could see from some of the early descriptions that we had a granitic host rock, that there was a broad zone of alteration and mineralization cutting through that. So I sort of had a gut feeling that resistivity IP would light this up as a resistivity low, and that could be the tool to be able to show that we're actually looking at a continuous zone. So in the historical data, I found an old gradient array IP geophysical survey. It was done in the late 80s, 89, I think. And essentially back in the 80s, you can see these images on the far left and right. This was the black and white contoured data of the chargeability on the right, the resistivity on the left. Back in those days, resistivity gradient array, you typically went and drilled the chargeability highs. That was the first thing you did with gradient array data in the 80s and 90s, and we all did it. So Cyprus drilled a couple of these targets, the resistivity, the chargeability highs, and they didn't hit gold mineralization. And for them, they concluded that the survey really wasn't that successful. But for us, it was the resistivity IP data that I was really wanted to focus on. From experience in North Queensland, I know that a lot of mineral systems in North Queensland, it's the alteration and the sort of contrast between the unaltered rock and the altered sort of mineralization is what defines the resistivity low. So we captured all this data digitally for the first time and reprocessed it ourselves. And you can see here, we're starting to sort of make out the starts of joining sort of a large continuous corridor. So for us, this was probably the largest step forward in sort of starting to show a bigger footprint associated with the mineralization. If we then combine, you can see the image on the right here is the processed resistivity IP geophysics. You can see a 1 kilometre scale bar down the bottom left here. The blue and the purple is what's mapping the resistivity low. And you can see the outline of the historical mining leases, or the existing mining leases. This mining lease in here was where the open pit was situated. So we're looking at it just from this gradient array data, we're looking at a 7 kilometre corridor here. When we combine this resistivity data with the historical auger data that was collected in the late 80s by Cyprus, the red and the purple here is defining gold anomaly, and it's quite a strong gold anomaly you get. And so back in the Cyprus days, they looked at this data and said, okay, we've got a really strong anomaly here and another strong anomaly here, and that's where the work focused. But for us, it was stepping back, overlaying that auger gold geochemistry with the new resistivity reprocessed data, that we could start to see that, wait there, this could be part of a large continuous gold system. And this was probably an important step forward as well for us to sort of leading in towards the IPO and sort of attracting some major investment there. The gap in the geochemistry sort of in this area through here, without standing on the ground, I had this gut feeling that it was going to be a function of regolith. And it wasn't until we actually got out and stood on the ground that we did confirm that this gap in here in the geochemistry is not a real geochemical gap. It's a regolith gap. It's a gap that you can see that this material here is actually Jurassic basal conglomerate. And it's really quite hard and fresh. And the auger definitely would not have penetrated through this cover. It's only probably a couple of meters thick, but it was recognizing this was another important step forward for us to sort of interpret the historical data and work out where the opportunity could lie. We then move forward to us. So we took the historical data, then we were able to interpret that as much as we could, understand sort of the positives and some of the negatives out of that historical data, working out where some of that data really wasn't appropriate. So we saw some critical data gaps that we knew that these were going to be the priority sort of steps forward for PacGold in our exploration program. So the first thing we did was map the whole area, and we were able to have the experience of Matt Houston sort of to do our mapping. Matt does a lot of sort of work overseas, South America, very experienced field geologist, and Matt's got a stunning amount of experience in South America in intrusion-related gold systems, and a lot of discovery experience as well. But Matt was stuck in Queensland due to COVID, and I've followed a lot of Matt's career, so I was able to give him a call this time last year and engage Matt to come up and do the first mapping over the whole project. So for us, this mapping that Matt achieved was able to sort of Matt's experience in recognizing vein textures in intrusion-related gold systems, his structure. The rock chip sampling that Matt completed was some of the first multi-element data that we had on the whole project. A lot of the historical exploration really just had gold-only analysis. So having multi-element geochem, we knew that was going to fill an important gap in our exploration going forward. We just know that with our experience in intrusion-related gold systems, that multi-element geochem just enables you to be so much more powerful with your thinking, with your development of the model, and your targeting and predicting where the high grades might lie. So this was one of the very first big important steps forward for our own exploration program. The next big important step was we could see that the gradient array IP geophysics worked tremendously just over this area. Now, gradient array IP, it really only just looks down through it's like a slice through the top 30 or 40 meters. So then our next step was to follow that up with 3D sort of geophysics looking downwards. So we did quite an extensive pole-dipole IP geophysical survey. And we specifically chose 25-meter space poles. We did a bit of orientation early on at the very beginning of our survey, just around the known mineralization. And we quite quickly realized that doing 50-meter poles was actually too coarse to recognize the detailed structures, and we needed to do 25-meter space poles. So that was fantastic that we were able to understand that early on before embarking on such a large survey. Now there's a 800-meter scale bar down the left there. We're looking at 7 kilometers along this structure here. Now, so we're looking at pole-dipole 2D modeled sections of the resistivity IP data. So the purple and the blue is mapping the resistivity lows, which are mapping out the important structures on the project. And you can see over the length of the entire survey, we've been really successful in mapping out the shear zone over the entire length. Now, this is the first time we've been able to demonstrate that it's not just separate prospects, that we are looking at a really important regional structure that's continuous over many kilometers. So this was, as I mentioned, the reason this works so well in defining such a strong contrast in the resistivity IP is that we've got granitic host rock, and where that granite's unaltered, it's quite strongly resistive. But as soon as you shear it, put hydrothermal fluids through that, you create a really strong contrast and you light up the resistivity low as the shear zone. So, and another important step forward for us as well, we recognise that historical drill geology just wasn't present digitally. We had it all in old historical reports. So one of the early things we did was commit to capturing all that old historical geology, drill hole geology, and that was an important step forward for us. It was a massive job. We got Tom and Lisa Orr involved. They did a fantastic job there. So it was deciphering. We had several generations of old drilling. There was codes, all sorts of codes and descriptions and different ways of describing quartz vein percentages and alteration. So we were able to bring all that back to a common denominator and code all that as well as capture the actual descriptions as well. So then looking at the drill hole, historical drill hole geology, you can see what our core library looked like when we rocked up. There was no historical core photographs. I mean, it just was old data and it was just lost in time. And the historical core farm was just a pile of old core trays. Nothing was really recoverable. So we committed really early on that we were going to commit to early diamond core drilling, to understand the geology, to get our structure right early on. And that was a massive, it was a strong commitment, but it really did pay off, and it accelerated our learning curve so quickly early on in the first couple of holes, in fact. So this was one of the early holes, hole 7. You can see here we're looking at just a zone of here's 3 meters at I think 21 grams. Quartz vein texture wise, we're looking at 2 different generations of silica. We're looking at a dark silica here, which carries sort of arsenic, antimony and low grade gold, and then that's overprinted by this white silica. And you can see the 2 different color variations. The white silica we now know is what carries the high grade gold. So understanding that early on was a massive step forward for us now in putting together the model for the project, and then understanding how we're going to move forward. So using the first couple of drill holes that we put into the project, we sat down with Greg Morrison, and Greg's got an amazing skill at sort of just looking at core photographs and his experience in Queensland and globally. He was able to sort of point us in the right direction as to what model we should be applying here. Our initial thoughts were we were an epithermal system, and we weren't that far off. We now call it epizonal rather than epithermal. So some of the early banding textures that we saw in core and thought were sort of coliform banding, crustiform banding, we now know that it was certainly banding in their high level veins, but it wasn't epithermal sort of vein banding. There were more stylolites in these high level sort of finely crystalline veins. So getting our model right early on was important for us. So we're currently applying the Donnellan Creek model, which is one of the type intrusion related gold systems in Alaska. And you can see some of the depths. We're sort of where we see ourselves sitting. Or in summary, the Donnellan model, you get these high level sort of arsenic, antimony, mercury, gold, sort of silica, and that's overprinted by a deeper, more crystalline silica that carries the high grade gold. And that's exactly what we're seeing in these early core holes. So far, this model is working tremendously for us. I mean, a big part of this model as well early on was that recognizing that we thought we sat high up in this system, and that going deeper in the system, we should start to see high grade gold. That was an important sort of step forward for us. And it really did sort of dictate how we planned some of the early drill holes and sort of how we managed that exploration risk. This is just looking at our long section as it stands at the moment. So we've got a 200 metre scale bar down the bottom here. The left of this figure is north, right is south. There's the historical open pit in the top of the figure here. So as mentioned, it's a long section looking along the mineralisation. The small drill holes here are the historical drill holes, and a lot of them really focused underneath the pit and mostly to the north. The larger circles here are the drill holes that we've completed over the last few months in our first drill program. They're color coded according to just downhole gram meters. We've kept it quite simple. We haven't tried to calculate true width at this point. We're still sort of getting our head around everything. So we're keeping it simple. We've also used quite a 0.1 gold gram per ton trigger to sort of image up this, to look at this section. So it's really showing us where the most amount of gold is on the section. So we weren't interested early on, we weren't particularly interested to know exactly where the highest grades were. We wanted to see where the most amount of gold was. And I guess that's how we looked at this differently early on. So a lot of previous thinking had modeled up the mineralization to plunge to the north. But when you sort of just look at where the most amount of gold is, it was suggesting that we sort of hedge our bets, really. It was, and you can see the pattern that we've drilled. We've tested ideas to the north, we've tested ideas it's vertical, and we've also tested ideas that it heads to the south. So it was a balanced exploration approach with this first program. So some of the highlights that we've achieved, I'll take you through sort of this section initially. So this section through here, we'll look at some of the geophysics, and we intersected some of the broadest mineralization on the project, 93 meters at 0.8. But south here, south of the pit, we've worked our way down through the system, and our model suggested that if we transition deeper, the grade should get better, and that's exactly what we're starting to see. So one of our early holes hit 26 meters at 3, and an undercut of that, we've now intersected 17 at 9.3. So we're starting to see some really nice continuity in the high grades. The black holes that are shown here, they're results that we're still awaiting with our good friends at ALS. So, and particularly one of those holes actually did intersect a nice zone, a 1 meter zone containing some really nice visible gold. So I'll take you through a couple of the sections here. So this figure on the left here is a horizontal slice through the 3D IP model that we created from all the 2D IP inversion models. So it's resistivity IP. Again, you can see that the blue and the purple is mapping out the shear zone, the alteration beautifully. The long section we just looked at was a slice north-south through here. So we're about to look at this section, cross-section A through here. You can see the old open pit. This is the 2D IP resistivity inversion model here. So what caught our eye on this particular inversion model, this IP resistivity section, was that we saw an amazing correlation between the mineralization, the alteration, and the resistivity low. So this is what gave us our first really strong confidence that that things were matching up. So for us, we saw this blowout in the resistivity IP beneath the old pit, and that was where one of our early holes targeted. There's hole 4, so this intersected the 93 meters at 0.8 with a number of zones of 1.5 grams gold. We then drilled a long strike from this section, about 130 meters. So I'll take you to that section. So this section here we're looking at is it's 130 meters south of that previous section. We're about 60 meters south of the open pit. On surface here, you can map, there's a 3 meter quartz vein that Matt sampled and got 0.3 grams gold. But the vein textures that we could see on surface were certainly high level textures, and suggested that potentially going deeper in this system was where we needed to be. And that's exactly what we did. So one of the early Cypress holes drilled 6 meters, 2 meters at 0.1 underneath the outcrop. And I think for them, that closed off the mineralization to the south. And so that's essentially where historical exploration really did cease. So for us, one of our early holes wanted to intersect the structure and just give us a modern intersection in relation to this IP data. So our first hole intersected 6 meters at 0.7. I mean, you wouldn't really get too excited about that, but again, the vein textures told us we should go deeper. So we stepped back, drilled another hole, got 26 meters at 3.6 with 3 at 21. Things were getting really, really exciting for us. And then, but still the vein textures and our exploration model said we needed to go deeper again. So we stepped back. Hole 26 was one of the recent holes we've just released, 17 meters at 9.3. Now this is getting really, really interesting now. So these are some of the results that have really sort of accelerated our excitement and belief in our model with the project. If we then step along strike and ask the question, well, what sort of strike potential could this have? Our resistivity IP certainly suggests we can see the structure continuing along strike. That's about 700 meters. We've drawn the target there. This is, where are we? We're about 300 meters south of that previous drill section I've shown. We're under some of that shallow cover. So on surface, you can't see anything. It's just the shallow basal conglomerate of the Jurassic cover. But the IP resistivity sort of certainly showed up the start of a resistivity low at depth. So we put in one of we call them a scout hole. It's a 120 meter scout RC hole, I guess you could call it. And that was to intersect the structure so we could step back and line up exactly where we wanted to be on this deeper target. So this hit a broad zone of alteration and mineralization, which we now know that is the precursor of starting to follow these zones deeper. Also, something to point out is we're also starting to see a nice correlation with the position of the mineralization in relation to the IP geophysics. So if I just go back a section, we describe this as the footwall of the resistivity IP zone. So in what we call the hanging wall, we see broad zones of alteration and veining and lots of 0.1 mineralization that is not shown in this section. But as soon as you hit the high grade mineralization, you go through what we call the F1A zone. And then within sort of 10 to 20 meters out the back of that, you transition into fresh, unaltered sort of granitic intrusion, host intrusion quite quickly. So the position, understanding the position of the lode, our target in relation to the IP is something that we've really only just learnt in the last month, really. So seeing the position of this in relation to the IP gives us extra confidence of targeting this deeper in the system. So this is what we call the F1A target through here. And our drilling following up, you can see the extension of this zone up to the north here. We certainly, in the drill holes that we've completed with results awaited, we certainly can see veining and alteration that we're quite encouraged by, that suggests that this zone continues on to the north and then could actually potentially continue for kilometers up into what we call the northern target. So I'm just going to move south from what we call the central target, and immediately to the south here is what we call the southern target. So this is again the a 3D, a horizontal slice through the 3D model of the IP resistivity data. Again, the blue and the purple is showing the resistivity lows. We can see a really nice broad resistivity low. There's a 500 meter scale bar in the bottom left there. For us, this zone, we see the alteration continue right through, and our feeling is that the resistivity low dives down and links back up with the central target further to the north. This was the bulk of the historical exploration completed by Cyprus in the 80s. They did a lot of shallow RAB drilling and a bit of RC drilling. The average hole depth would be in the order of 40 meters, so really shallow drilling. But what was really encouraged was this is the widest zone of the auger bedrock geochemistry, and it is dominantly residual profile in this area. So we're comfortable that the auger geochemistry here in this part of the world is reasonably representative. But we're really encouraged by some of the high grade drill results that Cyprus returned from their initial drilling. Now, all this drilling was done in the late 80s, and there's been no drilling completed in over 30 years on this target zone. Some of the high-grade results: Cyprus returned 8 metres at 55, 4 at 27, 18 at 4.5. Some really encouraging numbers. But for us, using this geophysical data to sort of put the whole system in context and start to join the dots has been the biggest step forward for us here. So the program that we've just completed here was a first pass RC program that came through. It was only 8 holes, and those 8 holes were sort of strategically placed to better understand the whole system and to get the first multi-element geochemistry across this whole zone. So this is the first step and there'll definitely be more follow-up drilling here. So this was designed as a first pass program to put us in context for our next phase exploration and have us sort of positioned a lot smarter with being able to see fresh geology in 3D, have multi-element geochem, and also particularly have this sort of 3D IP model across the whole zone. This image on the left here, I showed you it earlier, but what I was going to point out here is we've just looked at the central target here, the continuation through down to the southern target. We had a look at the southern target. This northern target here, there's some old historical drilling from the 80s that was completed by Cyprus, and they hit some pretty encouraging numbers, 6 metres at 4.5. But what we know now with our new IP geophysics is that the actual shear zone itself is under shallow cover, about 100, 150 metres further to the west. So this is going to really open up a fantastic opportunity for us that we can use this new geophysics to open up a whole new wave of exploration on this project. If we then take a step back and look at the regional picture, this is our tenement holdings in through here. There's a 5 kilometre scale bar on the bottom left there. We've got the AIG-ALS River shear zone just sort of mapped as that interpreted red line there. We've just focused in on a 7 kilometre corridor through here, encompassing the northern, central and southern targets. But when we look at where scout RAB drilling was done in the 80s, they actually encountered quite a bit of really encouraging initial results from just scout RAB drill programs. So a lot of this RAB drilling was targeting regional BLEG surveys that were done in the 80s, the late 80s. Now, BLEG was in its infancy back then, and the word regolith was probably in its infancy back then as well. So a lot of this area was actually thinly covered by sand cover and thin Jurassic sediments as well. So what the BLEG survey was really successful in doing was mapping out small windows of outcrop along the structure, and they got gold anomalies where the mineralisation certainly outcropped, and that's what Cyprus focused their early RAB drilling on. Now you can see I mentioned that they got some really encouraging numbers here. So for us, recognising that the BLEG data in between a lot of these prospects is probably not appropriate, and that the work that we've done down here at the northern target and over this whole corridor, we can see that the geophysics works so well at mapping out the shear zone, and it's such a cost-effective method to sort of do regional exploration using that geophysics that we'll now be able to expand that geophysical survey to the north and to the south here to map out these regional structures and join the dots, and not rather than separate prospects, we'll now be able to show that they're part of a large continuous gold system. And by the time that we're expanding our drill programs to the north and to the south, all the information that we've learned on the structure and the geometry, the mineralisation from our current drilling and in our programs over the next 12 months, we'll be able to apply that sort of on the regional scale. And I can just see that we call it sort of scalability, and it's got just the project has got that sort of potential that we could be onto a really, really regionally significant scale structure. So you can see that with the project pipeline is keeping us quite excited. Our focus going forward is certainly going to be on the central target. we're going to commence resource drilling here with as soon as we can get back into site. We've done a deal with the drill company where we've left both drill rigs on site. So as soon as we can get the four-wheel drive back in there, we'll be drilling again. So that initial work will be focused on the central target, and this year our work will expand down to the southern target, the northern target, and our geophysical surveys will expand along strike the regional target. So this will sort of build up a fantastic pipeline of projects as we go forward. So just summing up. So rapid exploration success using modern exploration. I mean, it was for us, the opportunity was seeing an overlooked historical gold field that really hadn't had a lot of the modern exploration models and the modern thinking applied to it. And so that's what we've come in and how we've achieved rapid success within 6 months. I mean, Jeff Lowe, it's a pity Jeff couldn't present this. Jeff's actually was fallen ill this afternoon. So I was able to step in and present this on behalf of Jeff. But Jeff's done some stunning work there, pulling this together in a short period of time. And hats off to Jeff. With COVID, he actually did have to spend, I think it was 13 or 14 weeks in Queensland before he was able to return home to Victoria. So a massive effort there. And just the credits to some of the team that's involved. I mean, there's no one person that makes these that sort of gets to the success that we've achieved in such a short period of time. And the guys at Planetary Geophysics, Matt Houston for his early mapping, the ore bodies did some fantastic work in compiling a lot of historical work. Brendan Turner from Centurion Drilling has been outstanding in sort of supplying us drill rigs. I mean, when we were IPOing in July last year, drill rigs, you just couldn't get drill rigs, but Brendan was able to supply us with some drill rigs, so that was fantastic. We've got Anthony Coots helping us with Greg Morrison, sort of pulling together the detailed thinking that sort of feeds into fine-tuning our exploration model on the project. And Tim Crass, Tim sort of is been a mentor for myself and Jeff for several years now, and so Jeff sort of is I like to think of Tim as our exploration coach. So the success has been boots on the ground. I mean, initially starting with mapping and sampling back in sort of Q2 last year, then transitioning into rolling out a very large geophysical survey, and then it's just been non-stop drilling since Q3. Just a couple of snapshots of the project there, and just a shout out to Tim Crass. I was fortunately was fortunate enough to be on the one of the very first of Tim's The Science of Discovery workshops a few years ago, and I really truly believe that attending these workshops, you really start to sort of understand how you need to focus an entire company on the sort of the pointy edge of discovery. And so that was the blueprint from that workshop is what we've used at PacGold, and I think that certainly has been an important contribution to where we're at right now. And yeah, so thank you for your time, everybody, and yeah, we will run through any questions if there's any.
Thanks very much, Tony. It was a fantastic talk and a great story once again of reinterpreting old data and knowing that when there was good work done, it's you know, most of it's done for you, and all you got to do is come in and do the right thing with that data.
Yeah.
While everyone's quickly writing their questions down, no doubt there'll be a few people with questions. I'll throw in a few of my own just to get the ball rolling. One of those early slides you mentioned, and again at the end you had the 17-kilometre long shear zone on your project area, and 20,000 metres of historic drilling data that was digitised. I guess most of it would have been focused pretty much on the old pit area. Have you got a feel for what percentage of drilling and data outside of that central area was actually spread out across the greater tenement or that greater shear zone?
Yeah, for sure, Peter. So at a guess, I would say 99.9% of that drilling was on the central target and southern target. So there would probably, on that regional slide I showed, there would be about 40 RAB holes outside of that target. So the central and southern target would have been the bulk of that drilling, and there'd be about 40 RAB holes outside of that zone. Maybe 40, yeah, 40, that'd be it. So, and those RAB holes would, average hole depth would have been 20 meters. Yeah.
Okay. And on the ground, can you actually see the structure in places, or is it fairly blind?
Yeah, no, we followed it south here, and we can see some scattered outcrops poking through the cover, and we've been able to rock chip some of those and get some results up to sort of 6 grams. So our work really has just focused in this 7 kilometre long corridor. We haven't really ventured out yet along the corridor, but we can see it. We can see it certainly in the geophysics in the 7 kilometre, and that gives us confidence that we should be able to map it with the IP extending out. Yeah.
Yep, sorry. Question from Doug Young asks, can you describe the alteration in a bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. I'll just find a slide. There might be a few slides at the end here. So this was a photograph from one of our early holes. So you can see this white veining, which is the veining that contains the high grade gold. And you can see this banding was some of the banding that we originally thought was sort of epithermal, coliform, crustiform sort of banding. But we now know that these are actually sort of stylolites. And while it's a finely crystalline high level vein, it's not the typical epithermal textures. And this green alteration is the sericite alteration. So it's not, if we were up in an epithermal system, we'd probably typically think we were seeing clay alteration. So we're seeing typical broad zones of sericite, green sericite alteration that is how we sort of know that we're coming close to the structure. And you can actually, going downhole, be quite predictive when you're coming close to a zone through the alteration.
And do the sulfides vary in the alteration as well?
Yeah, so with the veining, the sulfides, you're getting mostly pyrite associated with the sericite alteration, but not broad zones. We don't see a broad chargeability anomaly associated with the mineralization. But mineralogy-wise, this earlier dark silica, this is another great example of the sort of early dark silica overprinted by the high-grade white silica. And the bulk of the sulfides are in this early silica, and the coarse gold and the vast majority of the gold grade is sitting in this white silica. Again, this zone here on the left here, that's all finely disseminated gold in there as well.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Question from Dale Sims. Given the multi-stage mineralisation, is gold all in visible or free milling, or are there any refractory gold in sulfides?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the coarse gold, the majority of the high grade we see this white veining, and we do see some zones of high grade, the visible gold. So there is some historical met testing that was done by Goldminco in the late 90s, and that's when they were actually mining at the pit. So the assumption is that it came from the bottom of the pit, the sample, and they took a 10 kilogram sample that went 14 grams, and I think they got 30% of the gold came out in a gravity circuit, and the rest of up to 90% was then recovered through a cyanide leach. So there's a bit of evidence there that we're not talking about refractory, and petrology certainly sees the coarse gold not internal to sulfides. It sees all the gold that's been seen in petrology so far is all marginal to sulfides. So we don't see any concerns at the moment regarding any sort of refractory ores, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Doug's got a follow-up question in terms of the resistivity response. What do you think is what mineralogy is potentially giving that resistivity response?
Yeah, the resistivity, we see that mostly to do with, I mean, when you're in the unaltered intrusion, you know you're in the unaltered, completely unaltered intrusion when the driller comes complaining to you that it's just too hard. So that's one of the, certainly on this red zone out through here, when you're in that, the drilling is really, really hard. So you're in fresh, unaltered granitic, Siluro-Devonian granitic intrusion. But as soon as you're in this shear zone, you do see more zones of alteration and more zones of fracturing. It's not terribly fractured, but you see more veining. So there is more indications of alteration and shearing than there are in the less altered zone. So it's not a, we know that we're in the broad shear zone, but we're only just starting to sort of figure out that we need to get into the footwall zone of the actual IP resistivity low to intersect the high grade. That's our understanding at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Tony. You didn't mention, and or maybe I missed it, but is there any multi-element geochemistry, and is it showing you anything in terms of zonations or fitting the intrusion-related model?
Yeah, no, the work that we've done is the first multi-element data on the project, and so we're the first guys to apply that. And my experience with intrusion-related gold models, and I'm sure the audience as well, is that there's so many excellent tools and information out there how to apply that multi-element geochem to sort of and create a zoning model for yourself. So for us, yeah, we certainly can see a zonation at the moment, and you can see by the veining that I've pointed out. I mean, the early structure has certainly had a lot of the dark silica come up along that structure, and visually, geochem-wise, visually, it's arsenic antimony, low-grade gold. So when we see the high grade, the higher concentrations of arsenic antimony with low-grade gold, we know that we're probably seeing, geochemically, we're probably seeing more of this dark silica. And when we see that dark drop off, we see the sort of higher grade golds, lower arsenic, lower antimony. That generally means that we're seeing more of this. And visually, you can see the white quartz veining come in. But that's what we're seeing at the moment. And we're playing around with lots of other elements at the moment. So there's a lot of work in progress there at the moment, because a lot of these, we're still waiting on half the drill holes from this new discovery zone.
Yep. And seeing anything with bismuth or tungsten, and I guess Russ Chandler also asked, is there any associated silver?
We haven't put any of that. There is some silver, but as far as the element, the rest of the associations, there is support for an intrusion-related model, but we're sort of keeping a lot of that information sort of as our own intellectual property at this stage. But we're also still work in progress as well. So we're comfortable with the model that we're applying at the moment, but there's certainly no reason as we build our story that model will sort of creep and wander, and as we get more information in.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Dale Sims asks a question again. Local kinks and jogs will be likely important in chute controls. Any help in structural ORI modelling or oriented drill core?
Oh, most definitely, Dale. We use one of your papers as inspiration for us. We've got the discovery of the long section of Viranancy up on our wall for inspiration, and we certainly, part of our commitment to understanding this system is we're drilling a lot of core holes through the ore zones, and it's all HQ3. It's all beautiful orientated core. We're getting stunning recoveries and stunning orientations. So we are building up a structural model, and so that's all work in progress. We can start to see patterns emerging, and we're starting to sort of put together ideas that we're testing as to sort of which bend, a left-hand bend or a right-hand bend, is where the dilation and the chute's going to best develop. So a lot of that work in progress, but we're certainly thinking along those lines for sure.
Okay. I don't see there's any more questions, but I do have one last one perhaps. I think I'm aware of people's timing and we're getting close to our overstaying our welcome. So I guess one of the models you're applying is the intrusion-related system. and initially there was the epithermal system as well. Have you come across or seen what you think might be a smoking gun in terms of intrusions?
Yes. It's still work in progress, and but we're thinking along those lines, definitely, and we're working with Greg Morrison and Anthony Coote as well, and Jeff's putting all this, yeah, Jeff's sort of coordinating all our sort of our thought and putting our ideas together and getting the most out of the information. So yes, most definitely we're working. We think we're working towards understanding a bit more of that.
Fantastic. Well, on that bombshell, on behalf of the AIG and all the attendees, I'd like to take the moment to thank you very much and wish PacGold all the luck for the future.
Thank you very much for your time, and everybody. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Thanks, Peter.